Kilo Delta 2 Victor Romeo India. Kilo Delta 2 Victor Romeo India. Roger, Roger. You're 5-9 into November Juliet, New Jersey. So this is my first time participating in a DX contest. These stations basically are out of the country, some in country, but out of the country, Europe, South America, and everywhere else. So several people have commented to me about the use of ham radio in the community, the firearms community, and any other community for that matter, for people to share information and talk to people like-minded or otherwise, and mostly for emergency communications. And it's something a lot of people who are into preparedness, whether it's firearms training or personal security, are usually interested in some kind of communications for personal security or safety. And a couple years ago, I got interested into ham radio because of that, the emergency communications, personal security part of it. And it kind of blossomed into a little bit of a hobby. I'm sitting here in my shack, which is part home office. It's part reloading station, part workbench, part cycle studio, which you don't see on the camera, and part ham radio station. And I found the big thing about ham radio is practicing. There are regular nets where people get on and just, test repeaters and test their radios and make sure communication's working properly for if the time ever came. And then you have on these HF radios frequencies, you have these contests going on, which people use to practice, talking on the radio, testing their equipment, building new equipment, see where they can reach. And, tonight it's funny because you saw me connect with a station in Venezuela. I think that's my first single sideband connection in Venezuela, but I've connected today with Turks and Caicos, Bermuda, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Italy, Colombia, Portugal, Bonaire, Costa Rica, and Italy. So I'm running a very basic starter radio, FTDX10, and I'm running an $80 antenna, which is just a 102-foot wire hanging between the tree and the roof of my house, and running on a basic 100-watt radio. I have just the basic hand mic that came with the unit, no fancy equipment, no fancy amplifiers or any other kind of equipment. I'm running just a very, very basic setup, and it's basically getting me all around the US and, as you can see, South America and Europe. So I definitely see there's a definite benefit and definite use to having ham radio communications. I know a lot of people say, but wait a minute, when the war in Ukraine broke out, they were prohibiting, citizens from communicating on their radios. And, that is true. And things like that happen in different areas of the country. When there are natural disasters, they'll tell people to stay off the radio waves unless it's for emergency use. In America, there are large networks of Skywarn and Aries and RACES where they practice and they're registered with these organizations to provide weather, defense, or, natural disaster communications. And I mean, let's be honest, there are people who are going to have radios, whether they're HF or the smaller, VHF, UHF, smaller handhelds, point-to-point handhelds that use local repeaters. You're going to be able to connect, and if it's for emergency purposes, you don't even need a license for ham radio if it truly is an emergency purpose. But as you can see I'm doing here, I'm practicing my craft. I didn't even have to look at the radio. You learn the calls, you understand the lingo, you can learn to tune the radio. I'm running certain filters and shifting this the bandwidth here to get the signal and drown out other signals nearby. And those are the type of skills that you have to practice with. So, basically just like firearms and just like proficiency with a firearm, proficiency with your emergency communications requires practice. And there are people in the community, preparedness community, in the Second Amendment community, who are very much involved in ham radio and very much involved in the organizations that work with the repeaters, work with the training nets, and work with contesting. And I think it's something that really needs to grow in the firearms community. I see a lot of people, yeah, they have their ham radio license, they have a handheld or whatnot, but they don't have a lot of experience getting on the radio and communicating with people on the radio and practicing the phonetic language or practicing CW and Morse code skills, which I'll admit, that's something I haven't started yet. Again, it's all about practice, but I do think this is something that I think is an important topic for people to discuss and a fun hobby to get in nonetheless. So for those who have asked, Matt, why are you posting things about ham radio on the Average Gun Owner page? Well, I think there's a correlation here. There's a synergy, if you will, between the two. I own my firearm for, training for emergency use, and I train on my communication system for emergency use. And just like firearms, going to the range, competitive shooting can be a lot of fun. I'm starting to find that this ham radio stuff is kind of fun too. It's a good hobby, and I think it's something many of us should learn if the time ever comes. And I guess because I'm old enough to have lived through the blackout on the East Coast, to have experienced Hurricane Sandy, more so in the blackout, communications were down. But I have a system here on my computer or a laptop, which I could run on a battery power or solar power. I run software here, a WinLink software on the HF radio, where I can connect to stations anywhere around the country and get email out to people. I can get messages out to family members. Let's say the entire East Coast grid is down. I can quite literally, in a program on a laptop, not running on house power, run my radio, which runs on a car battery basically. I could hook up a laptop to my radio and I can send and receive email and give reports and get information out or receive information from people who have no experience in ham radio. All they need to have is an email account in an area that has access and coverage. And let's be honest, a lot of natural disasters and things of that nature are going to be a little more localized. So even though the whole East Coast was down during the blackout, I could have reached anyone in Midwest, Mississippi, the Rockies, and out to California, and even out of the country, by finding a pathway that had a signal, another amateur radio user that had set up a radio turned on, plugged into his computer, and running the WinLink software. So it's amazing, the different opportunities that are there for communications. And just like people practice with older style military firearms, they practice with modern ARs. People like their AKs, people like pistols, people like single actions, people like old cowboy type pistols. You have the same thing in ham radio. There's so many different kinds of radios. UHF, VHF handhelds, you have your HF rigs, you have your low power rigs, which you can climb up to the top of a mountain and do what they call summits on the air, or take radios that would mount into your car and an antenna you can mount to the back of the car, or just hang up in a tree and do what's called parks on the air. They're fun, kind of mildly addicting for me, and I get on every day when I'm working from home and I try to find parks on the air stations to talk to and rack up points and just kind of test myself and push myself and try to better my skills. So I think it's something we should talk about in the future. I think it's probably important at any meetings in the future, any Second Amendment events, that I think there should be more of a presence of people in the ham radio community who could be out there and just expose other people to this. And, I think it's something that everybody talks about, having emergency plans, emergency systems in place. Well, communications is very important, an integral part of those systems. So again, Matthew, the Average Gun Owner, and I'll be coming back to you with some updates as I learn more about these types of systems. So I'll talk to you later.
let me correct it. I got you somewhere else here. November Charlie, thank you, 7-3. Victor Papa 5, Mike.
Kilo Delta 2, Victor Romeo India.
Central Indian Romeo India.
Kilo Delta 2, Victor Romeo India. 5-9 into November Juliet.
Okay, Kilo Delta 2, Victor Romeo India, 59100.
Roger, Roger, 73.
Victor